Hello there, welcome back to the channel. It's been a while since I've done any videos. The reason being I've been very busy with work and life, and really the second is I haven't had a lot to talk about on for YouTube really. However, finally after nearly 2 months of waiting, my DJI Mavic Pro has arrived. Now, there's a bit of a long story with this one, which I won't get into. However, I wanted to do a video just outlining some specific things for the Mavic. I know on YouTube there's thousands of videos about this thing, unboxing, all of that. I'm not going to get into that. I just want to talk about some specific recommendations for the Mavic Pro. If you've never flown one before, or if you've flown a Phantom, or if you've never flown a DJI aircraft, just a couple of tips that will put you in good stead to make sure you don't get any problems. Right, number one, the IMU. You do not need to calibrate the IMU on the aircraft before you fly it. On the Phantom 3, the Inspire 1 and the Phantom 4, it was always recommended to do a cold IMU calibration before you flew the aircraft for the first time. However, with the Mavic Pro, DJI have introduced a new method of calibrating the IMU, where you move the aircraft through 5 axes. On top of that, they have stated that they do a specific calibration process at the factory under strict conditions. This means that you don't have to do it before you fly. So when you get your Mavic, you do not need to calibrate the IMU. Unless it prompts you to, I should add. So if the DJI Go app does tell you to calibrate the IMU, obviously follow the instructions for that. However, if you're not prompted to, don't worry, you can just crack on. The compass. Obviously, calibrating the compass has not changed. It is recommended you always calibrate the compass at your first flight location before you fly the aircraft for the first time. You don't calibrate it every time you fly. However, good practice is to basically calibrate your compass every time you move more than a couple of 100 miles, or the Go app prompts you to calibrate it. However, there's a few provisos around that, which I'll come to in a minute. Calibration on the Mavic is exactly the same as it is on the Phantom series. So you rotate the aircraft horizontally and then vertically, like that. However, do not calibrate it whilst it is folded. There is 2 compasses in the Mavic, one at the front and one at the back. When the arms are folded, you've got the motors next to the back compasses. This means it will affect the readings. So before you calibrate the compass, always fold the aircraft out to its fully open position and make sure you spread the props. The next thing to do before you calibrate it is always remove the gimbal clamp. So you remove the dome first of all, then the gimbal clamp. Do not turn on the aircraft with the gimbal clamp fitted, otherwise you could damage the gimbal. So you've got it all off, it's all like that, ready to go. You start the calibration process. One other thing I always say to people is make sure you have got nothing on your person that could interfere with it. So no heavy metal, no phones in your pocket, more importantly, no smartwatches. This thing, the Apple smartwatch, is almost kryptonite to a compass, especially the model with the stainless steel band. So make sure if you've got an Apple Watch, take it off, leave it to the side. Make sure you've just got nothing on your person before you calibrate the compass. Once you've done the calibration, you're okay to fly for the first time. Now, the only other time you should need to calibrate the compass again is number 1, if the app tells you to, or I would strongly suggest if you've travelled, say, more than 200 miles, then calibrate it at that flight location. Now, if the app comes and tells you to calibrate the compass, don't just jump straight in and do it. There's a couple of things you want to check first, especially if this isn't that far from where you've calibrated it before. If there's a lot of metal around, that can affect the compass and trigger the app into telling you to calibrate it. However, that actually, it's not that the compass is out of calibration, it's that the metal in the area is affecting the compass. So for instance, if you were on a roof of a building with steel reinforced concrete, or you had large power lines on the ground right under the aircraft, these would affect the compass. So if the aircraft ever pops up and says you need to calibrate the compass quite close to where you've been before, just stop and think a second and go, hold on a minute, where am I? Is there any metal in the ground? Could there be metal in the concrete, if you're on concrete, could there be cables? Pick the aircraft up, move 30 or 40 meters, turn it off, turn it back on, and see if it prompts you again. If it does, then do the compass calibration, but don't instantly jump to calibrate without checking the surroundings first. You know, have you got an Apple Watch on? Are you standing next to the aircraft? All these things will affect the compass. Talking about the gimbal cover and the gimbal guard, again, as I said earlier, do not fly the aircraft or turn it on with the gimbal lock in place. You can fly with the dome. The dome has full clearance, so while it will affect the image quality, you can fly with the dome on. You've got the dome and the rubber cover, so you can pop the rubber cover off and fly with just the dome. Really, my personal opinion is I don't see a big reason for it. However, it is something some people wanted to do, so it can be done. Propellers, just a couple of basic checks you should always do on your aircraft, really, before you fly. Number one is always check your props. Make sure they're in good condition. Make sure they're locked properly. These are folding quick release props on the Mavic, so they do two things. They come off very easily, so push down, click, and come off. And again, back on, and they fold. Now, when you turn the aircraft on and arm the motors, centrifugal force will throw the props out. Personally, I prefer to put them out myself, make sure they're pretty centered and make sure they're in good nick. If you've had any sort of knock, scrape, damage, inspect all the props, pop them off, look at the lugs on here. You know, these are plastic props, they can damage easily, so make sure you check the lugs, they're all in good condition. Look at the adapters on the motors, spin the motor, check it's okay, fit the prop on, lock it, make sure it's locked. Do that with all four. Make sure all four motors sound the same when they rotate. Listen for one motor that might sound different. Any change in tone on one motor is a hint something could be wrong. Actually, if I take my 250, which I smashed into the deck the other day, we've got one bad motor. So if I spin this one, it's good. This one, it sounds very different to the others. So obviously, spin the props, make sure they sound the same. Each motor does. Really, with the Mavic, the only other thing to be very careful of is the gimbal. It's a very, very sensitive precision device. It is the smallest gimbal DJI have ever produced into an aircraft. It's not got the same sensor as the Phantom 4. It's actually a slightly different Sony sensor with autofocus. I'm going to do another video specifically on the autofocus because there's quite a lot to talk about on that. But it is an absolute work of art, this gimbal. It really is tiny. The only other thing to check, really, is if you do have a bump or knock, that the gimbal is correctly in place, because there are lugs at the front that the gimbal clips into, and there's a lug at the back. I'm not going to be able to get it on the video, but there is a lug at the back that the gimbal must go under. If you were flying it and it was all fine, and then you start getting jello and you don't know why, just make sure it hasn't got caught under that back lug, and make sure that there's plenty of free movement on the gimbal. But I really can't stress enough that that gimbal is extremely delicate on this aircraft. Any heavy knock will have a very bad effect on its performance. Other than that, on the aircraft, you've just got the battery. It's a 3S LiPo. Smart battery like all the other DJI aircraft use, so it will self-discharge itself if you leave it fully charged. Only real advice on the battery is make sure you do not leave it fully charged for too long. It will self-discharge, but set your timer for 3 days and you won't have too many problems. And always store it 50% charged. So store it as the third light starts to flash on the battery. So when you're charging it, it goes 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. As soon as it gets to 1, 2, 3, take it off charge. That's roughly 50%. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching. I'm going to do a series of videos on the Mavic. I'm going to do another one on the remote controller. I'm going to do a dedicated video about the Focus, because there's a lot to talk about on that. And please subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much.